A janitor yells at his CEO in the middle of the parking lot, "Don't get in the car." Everyone thinks he's crazy, until what happens next shocks the entire company. This is a story of courage, respect, and how the most overlooked person can become the biggest hero. "Stop! Don't get in the car!" The sharp command rang through the glass-front parking lot like a gunshot, halting everyone in their tracks. Conversations died mid-sentence. Footsteps slowed. Heads turned. What they saw was so unexpected that even the most disciplined employees paused in disbelief. A janitor, yes, the janitor, stood frozen in place, his gloved hand raised in warning. Just minutes earlier, Marcus Green had been pushing his mop bucket across the marble floor, blending into the background like he always did. Now, his face was tense, his voice filled with urgency, and his presence impossible to ignore. And the person he was shouting at? None other than Claire Donovan, the CEO of Donovan Enterprises, the woman who built the company with her iron will and razor-sharp business instincts. Known for her perfect posture, her unshakable confidence, and her impeccable beige suits, Claire was the kind of leader who commanded respect the moment she entered a room. So when she stopped mid-step, one hand on the sleek handle of her luxury car, the contrast was jarring. Her eyes flickered from the janitor to her car and back again, filled with confusion and just a flicker of irritation. Did he really just raise his voice at her? The entire building seemed to hold its breath. Employees who had been heading home for the evening stopped to watch from a safe distance. Through the wide glass walls of the lobby, office workers pressed closer to see the drama unfold. Whispered conversations spread like wildfire. "What's he doing?" one assistant murmured. "Has he lost it?" "He's going to get fired on the spot," another replied. To most of them, Marcus was invisible. They passed him every day in the hallways, but never looked twice. He was the man who emptied their trash bins, who polished their floors, who wore the same blue overalls and carried the same tired expression no matter the day. They couldn't imagine he had any reason, any right to shout at the CEO. But the look on his face told a different story. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't disrespect. It was fear. Raw, urgent fear. "Excuse me?" Claire's voice cut through the silence, sharper than the sound of glass breaking. She tilted her head, her hands still resting on the car door. "What did you just say?" Marcus swallowed hard. His heart hammered in his chest, but he couldn't back down now. "Please, ma'am," he said, lowering his voice just enough to soften the edges, but keeping his hand raised. "Don't get in the car. Something's wrong. I think it's dangerous." Claire blinked, trying to process his words. Dangerous? Her car? That seemed absurd. This was the company's secure parking lot, monitored by cameras, patrolled by security guards. The idea that a janitor, of all people, would know something she didn't seemed almost laughable. But something about his tone, the tightness in his voice, and the urgency in his eyes made her pause. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Some pulled out their phones, already recording. Nobody dared move closer, but the suspense was suffocating. "Dangerous Claire," repeated slowly, her voice calmer now, but edged with suspicion. "And what exactly makes you say that?" Marcus hesitated. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't planned for anything. His shout had been pure instinct. But now all eyes were on him, including the CEO's. And the weight of the moment pressed down on him like never before. "I noticed something earlier," he said, his voice steadying as he forced himself to speak. "When I was cleaning, I saw something under your car. A device. Wires. I don't know exactly what it is, but it didn't look right. It didn't look safe." A ripple of gasps spread through the small crowd. The word device hung heavy in the air. Claire's eyes widened, and for the first time a flicker of uncertainty cracked her usual calm. She glanced down at the sleek black sedan parked beside her, its polished surface reflecting the overhead lights. Nothing seemed out of place, but then again, she hadn't looked closely. The moment stretched long and tense, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the building's air vents. Finally, Claire stepped back, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Security," she called sharply. Seconds, two guards rushed forward, their hands hovering near their radios. Marcus pointed quickly, his voice rising again. "Check underneath near the driver's side. That's where I saw it." The guards crouched down, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. What they found made one of them stiffen. He turned his face pale and whispered something into his radio. The crowd outside the glass gasped again. Claire's heart pounded. She suddenly realized that if Marcus hadn't shouted, she might have already been inside that car, her hand turning the ignition. Her eyes met his again, and for the first time, there was no confusion, no irritation, shock, and a growing reluctant res. The janitor's name was Marcus Green. To most people in Donovan Enterprises, he was just the cleaning guy, the man who emptied their trash bins late at night, mopped the marble floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights, and polished the glass walls that reflected their expensive suits and proud smiles. To them, Marcus wasn't part of the company. He was part of the background, a uniform and blue overalls, a pair of gloves, and a mop bucket that squeaked as its wheels turned down the hall. Invisible, forgettable, replaceable. But Marcus wasn't invisible to himself. Behind those tired eyes and calloused hands was a man carrying a heavy weight that no one in that shiny glass building could have imagined. Marcus was a single father raising his little girl, Zoe, on his own. She was only 7 years old, bright-eyed, full of questions about the world, and still young enough to believe her father was a superhero. And in many ways, he was. Marcus had lost his wife years earlier in a tragic accident. From that day forward, every burden, every responsibility, every dream, and every worry had rested on his shoulders alone. There were no grandparents nearby to help, no siblings to lean on, no second income to ease the weight of bills, just Marcus and the endless grind of survival. By day, he worked at a small auto repair shop, fixing old engines and changing oil for customers who often didn't bother to learn his name. By evening, he wore his blue overalls at Donovan Enterprises, cleaning offices where executives earned more in a month than he made in a year. He worked both jobs back to back, slept only a few hours each night, and woke up every morning before sunrise to prepare Zoe's breakfast and walk her to school. And yet, despite the exhaustion, despite the calluses on his hands, despite the ache in his back, Marcus never complained, not once. What nobody in that office realized was that Marcus was far more observant than they could ever imagine. While others scrolled through phones, rushed to meetings, or ignored their surroundings, Marcus noticed everything. It was part of who he was, an instinct born from years of responsibility and sharpened by his time at the repair shop. He noticed when an employee dropped a document in the hallway and picked it up without thinking. He noticed when a window lock didn't quite close properly. He noticed which cars came and went in the parking lot every night and which ones had fresh scratches or suspicious dents. He noticed which employees always looked confident and which ones carried the silent stress of secrets. Most of all, Marcus noticed details that others ignored because they didn't have to pay attention. But for Marcus, paying attention meant survival. It meant making sure Zoe had food on the table, keeping his job secure, and never letting anything slip through the cracks. He bent lower, peering underneath. His breath caught. Tucked beneath the driver's side was a small, boxy object, attached with wires, something that most people would have dismissed as random machinery. But Marcus knew better. His instincts screamed danger. His heart pounded. He looked around the lot, half expecting someone to be watching him, someone who didn't want him to notice what he just saw. But the lot was quiet, empty. For a moment, he wrestled with doubt. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe it was nothing. He was a janitor, after all, not a detective, not security, not an expert in electronics. If he spoke up and was wrong, he could look foolish. Worse, he could lose his job. But then an image of Zoe flashed in his mind. Her little hands clutching his shirt, her wide eyes when she said, "Daddy, promise me you'll come home safe every day." Marcus clenched his jaw. No, this wasn't something he could ignore. That was why, when he saw Claire Donovan herself walking briskly toward her car later that day, heels clicking, briefcase in hand, he felt his chest tighten. She was seconds away from stepping into danger, seconds away from turning that ignition. And that's when instinct roared louder than fear. "Stop! Don't get in the car!" he yelled, throwing aside hesitation and raising his voice in a way no one had ever heard from him before. The man they all thought was invisible was suddenly impossible to ignore. An hour earlier, Marcus Green was doing what he always did, wheeling his cleaning cart across the wide corporate parking lot, the squeaky wheels echoing in the late afternoon quiet. He was tired, as usual, but his mind wasn't on himself. It was on his daughter, Zoe. He thought about the way she had hugged him that morning before school, her small arms wrapping tight around his neck. "Daddy, don't forget pancakes on Saturday," she had giggled, her smile lighting up his weary heart. Marcus had smiled back, promising himself he would keep that promise no matter how hard the week was. But in that very moment, something unusual caught his sharp eyes. At first, it was nothing, just a faint line along the sleek, glossy black paint of the CEO's car. Marcus frowned. He knew cars. He had spent years in an auto shop, and he could recognize when something didn't look right. These weren't ordinary scratches. They were thin, jagged, clustered around the driver's side lock, the kind of marks left when someone tried to force him. His footsteps slowed. His hands tightened around the handle of his cart. Something about it made his stomach twist. And then he saw it. Just beneath the driver's side, barely visible unless you crouched low, was a small, boxy object tucked against the undercarriage. Wires, a flicker of metal. The sight made his blood run cold. Marcus dropped down to one knee, pretending to tie his shoe so nobody would question him. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't a part of the car, he knew that much. He'd worked around enough engines to recognize when something didn't belong. For a brief second, his mind tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just a repair component. Maybe it was trash caught in the frame. Maybe he was imagining things because of exhaustion. But then he remembered the news he'd scrolled through on his phone just the night before. A rival corporation accused of espionage. Whispers of sabotage. Executives talking about how far competitors would go to win in the high-stakes corporate world. Marcus had shaken his head at the time, thinking it belonged in movies, not real life. Now, staring at the strange device hidden under the CEO's car, those headlines came rushing back like a wave. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. If this thing was what he feared, then anyone who started that car could be in serious danger. Not just a flat tire, not just a breakdown, something much worse. For a moment, Marcus felt paralyzed. His mind spun. He was just a janitor. Who was going to believe him? If he went to security and he was wrong, they'd laugh at him. Worse, they might call it overstepping and fire him. He couldn't afford that. not with Zoe depending on him. But then again, what if he was right? The thought made his stomach clench. He pictured Claire Donovan, the CEO herself, stepping into the car, adjusting her suit, starting the engine, unaware that her life might end in an instant. The image made him shudder. He looked around the lot. No one else seemed to notice. A few employees passed by, chatting, too wrapped up in their conversations to glance twice. Security was nowhere nearby. It was just him. Just Marcus. And in that instant, he realized, if he stayed silent, if he second-guessed himself, if he let fear win, he might be the reason something terrible happened. Marcus took a step toward the building, ready to run to security and report what he'd seen. But fate moved faster. The glass doors to the lobby slid open, and out walked Claire Donovan herself. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she strode confidently toward her car, briefcase in hand, her expression set in that usual look of determination. She didn't glance left or right. Why would she? She was the CEO. She had meetings to attend, decisions to make, an empire to run. Marcus froze, his heart slamming in his chest. She was heading straight for the car. Straight for danger. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His instincts screamed at him, but his fear held him back. Who was he to stop her, to shout at her, to make himself the center of attention? And then, he thought of Zoe again. He imagined her waiting by the window that evening, her little backpack by the door, excited for Daddy to come home. What kind of man would he be if he let fear stop him from doing the right thing? His hesitation broke like glass shattering. Marcus dropped the cart, raised his hand high, and shouted with every ounce of strength in his body, "Stop! Don't get in the car!" The sound cut through the parking lot like thunder. Conversations halted. Employees turned, stunned. The CEO stopped in her tracks, her hand inches from the car door, eyes wide in shock. Everyone stared at Marcus, the janitor who never spoke above a whisper. And in that suspended moment, one question burned in every mind. Had he just lost his mind? Or had he Jay? The shout still echoed across the parking lot when silence fell like a blanket. Every head turned, every step froze, and all eyes locked on one scene. A janitor in blue overalls, standing stiff with his hand raised. And across from him, the powerful CEO of Donovan Enterprises, her flawless beige suit glowing under the late afternoon sun, staring at him as though she couldn't believe what had just happened. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. It was as though time itself had stopped. Then Claire Donovan tilted her head slightly, her expression hardening into that sharp, commanding look that made executives tremble in board meetings. "Excuse me?" Her voice cut through the air like the crack of a whip. Marcus's throat went dry. Dozens of employees were watching from the lobby windows, their faces pressed against the glass, like an audience waiting for a performance. A few whispered among themselves. He said quickly, his words tumbling out, "And underneath, I saw wires. A device. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't belong there. I think it could be dangerous." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Employees exchanged stunned looks. A device? Wires? The tension in the parking lot thickened. Claire's lips parted slightly, the faintest trace of uncertainty flickering across her otherwise composed face. She glanced at the car again. From where she stood, everything looked perfectly normal. Shiny, polished, flawless. The idea of danger seemed absurd. And yet, Marcus didn't look like a man playing games. He looked terrified. "Security!" she called sharply. Her voice carried authority, snapping two uniformed guards into motion. They jogged over, their expressions puzzled but alert. "Yes, ma'am?" one asked, his hand brushing the radio clipped to his belt. Marcus pointed quickly, urgency in his voice. "Check underneath, by the driver's side." And then came that morning. Marcus was pushing his cleaning cart through the parking lot, humming softly to himself to fight the drowsiness creeping in from lack of sleep. His mind wandered briefly to Zoe. He'd promised her pancakes that weekend, and maybe if the repair shop paid him a little extra, he could even buy her the art set she had been dreaming of. As he wheeled his cart past the CEO's reserved spot, something unusual caught his sharp eyes. At first, it was nothing more than a faint scratch around the driver's side door. Thin, jagged lines against the glossy black paint. He frowned, crouching down for a better look. Scratches like that didn't just appear. They were the kind left by someone trying to force a lock. And then he saw it. A thin wire, barely visible, sticking out near the frame of the car. His brows furrowed. Years of working in an auto repair shop had trained him to spot things others would miss. That wasn't part of the car. It didn't belong. Did he just yell at her? Oh, he's finished. That's it for him. Poor guy. What was he thinking? They couldn't imagine that a janitor had any reason, any right to raise his voice at the CEO. To them, it looked like madness. But Marcus didn't lower his hand. His chest rose and fell with quick breaths. But his eyes burned with urgency. "Please, ma'am," he said, his voice steadier now, though still heavy with fear. "Don't get in the car. Something's wrong." Claire's brow arched. She glanced at her vehicle, then back at him, confusion flickering across her face. She had dealt with lawsuits, mergers, hostile takeovers, and international negotiations. But never this. Never a janitor telling her not to step into her own car. "What exactly are you implying?" she asked, her tone low but edged with steel. Marcus swallowed hard. He could feel every gaze on him, every whispered judgment. But there was no going back now. "When I was cleaning earlier, I noticed scratches on the lock." The guards exchanged skeptical glances, but obeyed. One crouched down, flashlight in hand, scanning the area Marcus had indicated. The moment the beam of light hit the small, boxy object tucked against the undercarriage, the guard froze. His posture stiffened. His breathing quickened. Slowly, he leaned closer, eyes widening with every second. Then he turned, face pale, and whispered something into his radio. The second guard immediately tensed, one hand instinctively resting near his holster. From behind the glass walls of the building, employees gasped. Even those who had been smirking moments earlier now looked uneasy. "What is it?" Claire demanded, stepping forward. Her voice, though firm, carried a tremor she hadn't meant to reveal. The guard stood, his face grim. "Ma'am, he's right. There's something under your car. It looks like an improvised device. We need to call the authorities immediately." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some clapped hands over their mouths. Others pulled out phones, texting furiously. The tension that had begun with Marcus's shout now surged like a tidal wave. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She was a woman who prided herself on control, of her company, of her image, of her destiny. But in that moment, staring at the car she had been seconds away from entering, she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: vulnerability. She turned slowly toward Marcus. Their eyes met. His were steady, filled with the same urgency he'd shown from the start. But now, behind that urgency, she saw something else. Relief. Relief that she had listened. relief that disaster had been avoided. For the first time, Claire Donovan saw him not as the janitor who mopped her floors, but as a man who had just saved her life. Within minutes, the area was sealed off. Yellow tape was rolled across the parking lot. Employees were ordered back inside, and a bomb squad was dispatched.